Climate change is very much a human rights issue. It's probably one of the great human rights challenges that we face. And I'm very glad that that was brought out in the Human Development Report for this year on tackling climate change and human solidarity. Why do I say that? I was at the World Social Forum in Nairobi in January, and I listened to terrible stories from members of communities that were being devastated by floods they had never seen before, by drought, and they were aware that something terrible was happening, and they knew that they weren't responsible. There's a huge ethical dimension, and there's a very big social dimension. If you approach climate change as an environmental problem, if you frame it that way, you'll come out with adaptation, meaning technological responses such as seawalls and drought-free seeds, etc. All of these are important. But if you view climate change, as I do, as a deep social and ethical and human rights problem, then you begin to look at how people experience it, what their needs are as communities, and how we should respond.
Do you think that the world's poor are more at risk because of this?
Oh yes, we know that. We know the band of countries basically that will be worst affected, and they just are unfortunate in their geographical location. They're low-lying, they're vulnerable to desertification, they're the poorest countries. So we will aggravate the problems. We may have, it's estimated, even hundreds of millions of climate refugees. We have to address this very rapidly, and we have to see that there is an opportunity in all of this, an opportunity for the human solidarity that the Human Development Report talks about. We can even use the event of next year that we come up to the 60th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. I see a very real parallel between the time when that was drafted, thinking about future generations after 2 world wars and a Holocaust and dropping of nuclear bombs and the opening of the Cold War. Where are we now? We have the ideological divides, we have poverty divides, we have nuclear proliferation again, but we also have the potential catastrophic impacts of climate change. We know from the reports, from the work done by the UN and other reports, that a lot of the impacts are there whether we like it or not over the next 30 years. But we can mitigate and adapt, have mitigation and adaptation on a far different scale. We need to have a sense of human solidarity that is greater than we've ever had. And to do that, we need common values. Just listen to the language of the Universal Declaration. Article 1, all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. Where's the dignity of small island people when their island disappears? Where's the dignity for small farmers already on the margins of being able to find food security when suddenly it's changed because of the energy policies of other countries, the greenhouse gas emissions of the richer part of the world and now the big emerging economies. The Universal Declaration also speaks about duties to the community, without which you don't realise your full potential. If we can bring these values into education, into curricula, into NGO, into the business sector during this next year, and ask countries as they approach climate change to fulfill human rights.
Do you think that there's a moral obligation of the rich countries to help the poor?
I'm absolutely certain of it. A moral and ethical obligation of a very acute nature, because never before has so much harm been done and threatened to the poorest, vulnerable communities in a way that we know about by those who are better off. And you know, the Universal Declaration talks about barbaric acts. Is it not somewhat barbaric to continue with energy policies that you know are going to have this impact and not have a much more rigorous approach to change? I'm glad that we're talking at a very personal level about everybody's personal carbon footprint. I'm conscious myself, I travel quite a lot, and I need to think about offsetting, and that's a personal thing. We need as communities, all of us, we need as countries, as the United Nations under the leadership of Secretary General Ban Ki-moon. I'm very glad that he's taken that as a personal challenge, and I hope he too frames it always in human rights terms, because it is a big human rights challenge to our world. We also need to recognise that there is a strong gender dimension to tackling the impacts of climate change. Now, gender is not just about women, but it happens that it will impact more on women. This has been discussed recently in a Women Leaders Security Summit. One of the specific areas was climate change. And we recognise that most of the small farmers in developing countries are women. That women have problems of discrimination, lack of property rights, inheritance rights, that make them more vulnerable within their communities and within vulnerable sectors to climate change. And yet, this has not yet come through because we haven't framed in the right way. So we must frame climate change broadly enough to see that it has environmental impacts, social impacts, huge moral issues, very big ethical issues, and that there are very real human rights dimensions which require human rights values of solidarity. And I think there is an opportunity for greater human solidarity in tackling this whole issue.